right, oh, train's coming. Good morning, everyone. For those of you who haven't met me yet, I'm Kelly Moulton with the Sacramento County Department of Airports. We want to thank you guys again for being here and participating with us. We have a slight change to the agenda this morning. I know you all think we're going to talk about P3. Actually, we recorded all the karaoke last night, so we are accepting donations not to play your video. Otherwise, Eric and Cole were up all night editing. So if you guys could go ahead and All right, so really, why we really want to hear, no one wants to see the video, but we're really here to talk about P3. So I'm going to introduce Michael Hotelling from CNS, who's going to moderate this session. So thank you all.
Good morning. It does work. So, really excited to see a robust crowd show up this morning. We thought the content would be compelling enough to bring you out the morning after the social event, and most of you look like you're in pretty good shape. Most of you. Michael Hotelling with CNS Companies, and I have the honor to moderate this next session on public-private partnerships, or P3, and the evolution of P3. We have three very informed speakers to share three very different stories with us. We have Brian O'Neill, who's the Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer of the Phoenix Mesa Gateway Airport Authority. He'll be sharing with us a story about development at his facility. Scott Owens, who's the Airport Chief Operating Officer and Senior Vice President of McClellan Jet Services, Sacramento McClellan Airport, will be sharing his story. And then Scott Powell, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Superior Aviation Company, will be sharing his story with us as well. Before we get too far into it, I did want to thank our sponsors, Jacobs & Daniels, Lee Fisher Jacobs, and Charles M. Schultz, Sonoma County Airport. So please give us a round of applause thanking our sponsors. So what is P3 and what does it mean to you? I think for me, the first time I heard of public-private partnership in the airport arena was probably back in the days when Pittsburgh was developing their new terminal back in the mid-90s. And BAA came in and operated the terminal and the concessions in that. So at least for me, that was the first time I'd heard that terminology. You may wonder, does it have any relevance to your particular airport and your facility? And think, well, P3 just means one thing, but it means a lot of different things. It means a lot, obviously, with a concurrent P3 conference going on in San Diego right now that has about 1,000 participants. So growing interest and energy around the term. But I think what you're going to hear today are three very different stories, and I think you'll see very strong application to probably situations you're dealing with as resources become more and more scarce and the availability of public funding becomes more of a challenge. The private sector funding to develop and maintain facilities and operate facilities becomes more and more attractive and more of a reality. So with that as an introduction, and to set the stage for this, Brian's going to be first up and share the story for Phoenix Mesa Gateway Airport. Brian?
Thank you, Michael. Good morning, everyone. Before I get started, two things. One, can I see a show of hands of any person involved with an airport that has ever been involved with a P3 project? So this will, yeah, we were trying to, going back and forth, the panelists, was it 10%, was it 30%? But it seems like a lot of you have been involved in a public-private partnership at one time or the next. And also, before I get started, Alex Smith, could you stand up, please? Alex Smith is my 26-year-old operations manager, and he just nailed his oral exam this weekend. So he is he is the newest AAE, and he is one of the rock stars of this conference. So congratulations, Alex. So just a little, before I get started talking about Skybridge, Arizona, which is our P3 project that is currently underway, I just want to give you a little background on the airport for those of you that aren't familiar with Phoenix Mesa Gateway Airport. We're a former military base, Air Force pilot training, World War II pilot training facility. We converted during the BRAC commission back in the early 90s. We have 2 airlines and currently have 46 nonstop destinations, Allegiant and WestJet. We also have several pilot training schools, and we do a hefty amount of military business as well, although we don't have any based military aircraft. A lot of transient aircraft like to come to the Valley to practice. And so this year we'll do probably a little over 300,000 operations. It's a real diverse airport. It's a 3,000 acre facility with 1,000 acres of developable land. So there's a real lot of opportunity at Gateway as the East Valley continues to grow and expand in the future. So here's the airport, and you can see the 3 areas that I've got identified as growth potential and development opportunities for the airport. The one that I'm going to talk about today is a 360 acre parcel that's located on the south end of the airport. And it used to be called the Gateway Aerospace Park, and now it's called Skybridge, Arizona. Just to help you better understand how we got to where we are today, I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the process, or if you're from Canada, the process that we went through to get to this point. We had an industry event back in April of 2016 called Envision Gateway. Envision Gateway was our opportunity to invite over 100 airport developers, airport operators, and airport investors to Mesa to learn a little bit more about the Arizona economy, what's going on in the greater Phoenix region, really more specifically the growth of the Phoenix East Valley, and then some of the opportunities that we have at Phoenix Mesa Gateway Airport. During that 2-day event where we had a lot of presentations and a lot of one-on-one meetings, we heard loud and clear that our low-hanging fruit was 1,000 acres of developable land that lies adjacent to 3 10,000-foot runways. And so from that event, we developed a request for qualifications, and in June released an RFQ looking for a partner who shared our vision, had industry connections, and was willing to invest in this project. And from that, we received 5 qualified submittals from companies or groups of companies from around the world. And we narrowed that down to 2, the 2 that we felt best fit what we were trying to do at Gateway Airport. Once we got down to the 2, we issued an RFP so that both of those companies could do a deeper dive into their vision, the resources that they were bringing to the table, and kind of their timetable for helping us develop the 360-acre parcel. It was a really interesting process. We received, from the 2 qualified companies that participated in the RFP, we received 2 very different proposals. One was kind of a traditional, build the infrastructure, we've got connections, we'll go out and we'll fill your land. And the other was, turn over the land, we'll pay for it, we'll invest money in the infrastructure. We've got an interesting concept, a new concept that we want to bring to Mesa, and we're willing to sign on the dotted line. After weighing the pros and cons of both, and the conservative proposal that really hasn't worked for us in the past, because a lot of people wanted to come in and wanted to occupy buildings that are already in existence, especially since they can't buy the land, they can only lease the land. They wanted to lease existing buildings. So from that, we picked a company, a consortium of Mexican and US companies called Mesa Skybridge LLC. We negotiated a memorandum of understanding with them, and we got to work trying to hammer out a master development agreement. And during that time, it was very challenging because this consortium of Mexican companies had developed projects south of the border, but they had never really developed a project in the United States. And the way that a project gets developed in Mexico and the way the project gets developed in the US are completely different. So there was a real learning curve and education process that we had to go through along the way. But we were successful, and in November we signed a master development agreement. It's a 49-year agreement where they are the sole operator of those 360 acres. After we got the master development agreement signed, we started working on the master lease, which was very complicated, and actually turned into 2 leases where we've got a master lease for the 360 acres, which is 49 years. And then each time they get a deal, they have a takedown package, they break a piece of that master lease off, and it becomes a development lease between the developer and the airport authority. So if Mesa Skybridge LLC is successful in the long run, the master lease will go like this, and we'll end up with 50, 75, 100 development leases around the airport that are directly between the development partner and the authority. So we got that done. We are now at the point where we are going through a kind of a master plan, land use plan with them on the 360-acre site. And they've also engaged the FAA doing an environmental assessment on the property and working with them to ensure that we get all the appropriate environmental clearances. And Mike Williams and the Phoenix ADO have been great partners in this. You know, this is a first for Gateway Airport, and it's nice to have them as our partner and the experience that they have. And you know, I'm not claiming victory yet, but we certainly have had a lot of successes up until this point. So just a little bit about the Skybridge project. I talked about the master development agreement, again, it's for the 360 acres on the south end of the airport. The master developer has agreed to invest $40 million. They're going to be building out a taxiway extension. They're going to do the roadway system, the sewer, the water, the detention ponds, the fiber. They're going to really unlock the site for development, which is great, great for the airport, because one of the reasons why it just sat as dirt for so many years is we just didn't have the resources to be able to invest the money to unlock that site. So this is where a private partner really comes, you know, really is valuable to the organization. And then their vision, and I'll share a little bit about their conceptual designs in a minute, but their vision, they want to bring between 3.5 and 5 million square feet of additional development to the airport. And you know, their early projections are they're going to bring between 13 and 15,000 jobs to the region, which, you know, we're owned by 6 member communities, and when the 6 member communities hear that many high-paying jobs are coming to the region, you know, they're very supportive of this project as well. The other thing that they're bringing is a new bilateral trade agreement called the Unified Cargo Processing Program, where in August of this year, the United States and Mexico met in San Diego, and they hammered out a deal where in Mesa, we have had and we will continue to have Mexican customs officials operating at the airport, doing joint inspections with U.S. Customs so that they can pre-clear any cargo that's bound for Mexico. So instead of going to one of the 14 airports across Mexico that has both customs and immigration, cargo can be processed at Gateway and can enter the country as a domestic product and can go to any of the 114 airports that serve Mexico. So we're the first inland airport that to offer this service, and we're really excited about the possibilities. Our first shipment happened on, I think it was May 21st, and we had a shipment that was cleared that went from Mesa to Hermosillo, Mexico, and it was more ceremonial than anything, but it was really interesting to see U.S. Customs officials in their uniforms and Mexican Customs officials in their uniforms working together to joint inspect and moving it from one end of the facility, which was the United States, to another end of the facility, which was, you know, Mexico, and then to see the product leave as a domestic product of Mexico. So it was really exciting. The MDA structure, just to give you a little bit of a background on how it's structured, the Master Development Agreement established minimum development requirements, and then also established remedies in case of non-performance. So they've established this is what we're going to do by year 7, by year 15, by year 25, by year 35. And if they fall short of those expectations, the airport, the authority, has the right to remedy that, whether it's a financial penalty, significant financial penalty, an elevation to fair market value or beyond immediately, or we're going to claw back some of the remaining acreage that they haven't developed at that point. So there are several different remedies that we have in case of non-performance. The master lease, as I said, is 49 years, no extensions. It transferred control of the property. It granted horizontal development rights, so after they get the environmental clearance from the FAA, they can start to turn dirt and put in that infrastructure that they need before they start leasing out the vertical infrastructure. And it also established a base rent payment and escalators along the way. So after year 3, Mesa Skybridge LLC is going to pay a land lease on all 360 acres moving forward. So there's a big incentive for them in the early years to make sure that they develop that so they're not just paying on empty land. And then the development leases, as I said, that's when that grants them vertical development rights. That's when they can start to build their buildings, and it also takes away the acreage from the master lease as well. So Here's what we looked at for years and years before entering into this agreement, entering into this 49-year marriage with Mesa Skybridge. This is Skybridge, Arizona, 360 acres located at the south end. And quite honestly, and I'm not underestimating, this is what it would look like 10 or 20 years from now, just because we didn't have the money to invest to unlock the property. But getting into an agreement with Mesa Skybridge, this is their vision of what Skybridge, Arizona will become over the next 49 years. It's a mix of aeronautical and non-aeronautical, and later on in the presentation, I'll kind of share with you how they think that the land uses will break down, which is right here. So you can see that, and I need my glasses for this, I apologize. 25% will be a joint use customs facility. 47% will be warehouse, light industry, and aerospace innovation. 11% will be offices and research and development. 3% will be retail and hotels, and then there's 16% of it that is non-developable, and that's the taxiways, the roadways, the landscaping, the detention ponds, all that. So just a little bit more about the Unified Cargo Processing Program. If you're shipping things to Mexico right now, oftentimes your cargo will end up in Mexico City, and it could stay there for up to 14 days or more before it clears customs, and then it has to go on to its final destination. In this age of e-commerce and emerging e-commerce in Mexico, where right now they're not getting the prime afternoon delivery that we get here in the United States, they don't even get second-day delivery. They're getting, their parcels are coming 7 to 10 days or longer. This new program, the Unified Cargo Processing Program, would allow companies like Amazon, Target, Walmart, and other leaders in the e-commerce industry to be able to get an order from a resident of Mexico. They place that order, and if they change their logistics on certain Mexican shipments to be able to go through Gateway Airport, they'd be able to offer second day or next day delivery on those parcels in certain parts of the country. It's going to dramatically change how e-commerce is handled in Mexico. And their goal is to, once they've got Mexico down and once they've kind of worked all the bugs out of the system, they're looking at other countries in Latin America too, because they see this expanding into great opportunities into the large population bases in Latin America that aren't getting the same services for e-commerce that we're enjoying here in the United States. So we're really looking forward to that. I think it presents a lot of opportunities. Our location in the Southwest, we're ideally situated to handle the entire region. They talked about looking at other parts of the country to establish their first development, and they really focused in on Mesa for a couple of reasons. One is our prime location, and number two is our 3 10,000-foot runways, our 365 days a year of wonderful flying weather, and just the good customer service they received when they came to visit. So you can see that as we continue to develop this, it's not only for e-commerce. We've got companies located on airport that are already negotiating with Mesa Skybridge to ensure that their shipments are shipped through the Unified Cargo Processing Program to some of their customers back in Mexico. And they're saying that could take 2 weeks off of their delivery time. So here's a little video about Mesa Skybridge. And if I'm running short on time, just give me the hook.
From the beginning, mankind has explored the world looking towards new horizons. We have traveled long distances, created new roads, and overcome challenges and obstacles. This philosophy has inspired us to seek new markets in order to achieve elevated goals. SkyPlus is a company dedicated to aerospace logistics, which has become a market leader in the international trade environment. With the setup of the first aerospace park in Guanajuato, Mexico, SkyPlus offers direct distribution shipment clearing to any part of the country. Recognizing future trade flows and opportunities, Skybridge embarked on a journey to develop and market the first air-unified cargo inspection logistics hub in the interior United States, changing the way high-value goods reach Mexican consumers, supported by Mexican and American customs. Located at the Phoenix Mesa Gateway Airport, Skybridge, Arizona will not only be an international logistics center, but also a research, development, and aerospace manufacturing hub, turning Arizona into an important source of employment in the Southwest Corridor, creating thousands of new direct and indirect jobs. In Mexico, the growth of e-commerce opens an important business opportunity for Skybridge, Arizona, since 2 out of 3 people with internet access have purchased something online. With this in mind, Skybridge is expected to capture 5% of the market that travels from the Southwest U.S. to Mexico and Latin America. Air logistics trade between Mexico and the Southwest U.S. represents approximately $650 million per year by 2025. Skybridge has the opportunity to cover 3 different interconnected markets. First, speed up and secure the shipment of merchandise to Mexico and Latin America, including e-commerce products. Second, take advantage of Skybridge's strategic location in the Phoenix metropolitan area to meet the demand of manufacturing and warehousing space for the growing technology, aerospace, and e-commerce industry. And finally, to accommodate professional development and growth in the area, office, and incubator space, particularly targeted to the aerospace industry. Its proximity to Arizona State University provides an important alliance to generate employment opportunities for new graduates. All of these elements will lead Skybridge towards success. First, CBP and Mexican Customs have signed a Memorandum of Understanding to start the operation of the Unified Cargo Processing Program, which will be the detonator of merchandise shipment for Skybridge, Arizona, between the United States and Mexico. Second, thanks to the approval of the Phoenix Mesa Gateway Airport Agreement, Skybridge, Arizona commences the development of 360 acres that will make up America's only international air logistics and cargo processing hub with Mexico. And last, Skybridge, Arizona makes international commerce fast, simple, and reliable, adding the ease of trade into many more future potential destinations beyond Mexico into the rest of Latin America. Skybridge, Arizona and its customs processing will be a critically demanded service in air logistics, enhancing the supply chain with safer handling and transportation for high-value goods. As the master developer, Skybridge will follow a 15-year investment plan, beginning with the basic horizontal infrastructure and services of the project. This investment will attract other industry leaders that will invest in their own project needs, creating multi-million-dollar investments tailored to their industry demands. At its completion, Skybridge, Arizona will generate tremendous market benefit that will be felt by not only the surrounding community, but the entire state of Arizona. With its 7 million residents, consolidating itself as a research, development, and aerospace manufacturing hub. With the support of an excellent team, Skybridge, Arizona will consolidate as the first inland air logistics unified cargo inspection hub in the United States, becoming a generator of more and better jobs, providing a better product delivery service, increasing exports for the benefit of the Arizona worker, and with this, strengthening the collaboration links between the United States, Mexico, and Latin America.
I'm going to beat that. Oh. So just so that, I think you can all agree that we're not claiming victory yet, but there have been a lot of successes in this project, and the opportunities are great, so we're really looking forward to seeing how this project unfolds over the next several years. And we're confident that we are going to be able to look back on this and say that this was probably the turning point for Gateway Airport, maybe not in the aeronautical side, but as far as an economic engine and economic job creator, I think this is a real opportunity. What you see on the screen right now is our next project. We just received our record of decision and our finding of no significant impact by the FAA on 700 acres that are located on the east side of the airport. That's where our future demand-driven passenger terminal will be located, but there are a lot of opportunities there for both aero and non-aero development. So we're just starting the process of looking at land uses and infrastructure costs, but this will hopefully in a couple of years we'll be able to come back and talk to you about what's happening over at the Northeast Development Area. So thank you again. I really appreciate the opportunity to come in and talk about Skybridge, and we'll answer questions after the presentations.
One story about P3 and how to develop available land for a great opportunity in creating international commerce. So excellent, excellent story on that. We'll pivot now to Scott Owens, who tell us a little bit about a very different approach to P3 from an operational perspective. So Scott?
Hey, everybody. First thing I want to say is thanks to TJ for inviting me here for this. So, when he invited me, the first thing I had to think about was, I'm probably the least qualified person in this room to sit up here and talk about airports to you all. I'm a maintenance guy that wound up in a position doing business development at this airport. So what I thought I'd do is I'll start out with a little bit of history about the McClellan Airport. We'll go into the BRAC closure, which was the same round that Brian was talking about here. And then we'll talk a little bit about how McClellan Park and the airport came to be. So with that, I'm going to start out with more stuff that I don't know a tremendous amount about, and that is World War II. So 1936, apparently, there was things going on that prompted the Air Force to decide it was time to build an Air Force base at McClellan. And the idea there was that it was going to be a sort of a pivotal location. It wasn't located right on the coast, but it was close enough for them to have quick access. So it turned quickly into a significant economic engine for the Sacramento area, just as a military base. So some of the most important things that happened there was in 1941, everybody knows what happened then, right? We got Pearl Harbor got attacked. What I didn't realize, again, lack of history, is that it was within 2 hours after that attack that McClellan was sort of mobilized to get its fleet of, I think we had at the time B-26s and P-40s ready to go. So that was a pretty impressive deal. It turned into something that was even a little more significant, that in Doolittle's Raiders. You guys have probably heard about that mission, right? That was flown out in 1942, B-25s. There were 16 of those aircraft. And they left McClellan, they went to Alameda, and they were put on an aircraft carrier, and away they went. Of the 16 aircraft, 15 of them made it back to China. They couldn't get back to aircraft carrier. They couldn't physically land. But the point is that they all crashed. Most of the guys survived. 70 out of 80 actually made it back to the United States. And it gives you sort of a little bit of history about what McClellan is all about. Big assembly lines and that sort of thing. So about that time, in World War II anyway, when they were at their height, it's about 4,500 jobs that were going on there. Let's see if I can navigate this thing properly. There we go. 4,250 jobs. There was 17,000 people that were working that were civilians at the height of World War II, so it was a pretty darn busy place and growing and growing. So by 1967, we had 26,000 jobs going on there. And that was its actual peak. A lot going on. So the picture I'm trying to paint here for y'all is the size of this thing. Like Brian said, I think he said he's at 3,000 acres. We're at 3,000 acres as well. We have one runway, whereas he said he's got 3 of them there. But the infrastructure by the way of buildings at this point in time, without building anything, is 8.5 million square feet of building space. 1.5 million of that is aviation, or was when I first came there. A little different than that now because we've done some rezoning to more accommodate the market in aviation, which is a little less in the Sacramento area than the ability to absorb that into commercial real estate. So along comes the BRAC closure. 1995, Realignment Closure Act. Everybody's heard of that. So what was at risk here was 11,600 jobs. Okay, that's a big deal to any city, and especially the little community of North Highlands, which is located. About 34,000 retired people there, and about 50,000 people that were dependents on them. A $1.5 billion, at risk of the economic impact of this thing was pretty darn significant. There was a lot of efforts by local folks to try to offset that and keep that from happening. but nonetheless, it did occur. So, as we started moving towards the closure, 1995, it was announced that we were going to lose all of these jobs. Officially, in 2001 is when it happened. So now you have a little bit of history. Along those lines, it was in the late 90s when the County of Sacramento realized that they were going to end up with an economic development conveyance of this property. They had already lived through this once at Mather Airport, where Scott Powell was at. And so they had a previous experience with how this works. And I think at that point, that sort of prompted them to say, you know what, we could use a little bit of help with this. So they came out with an RFP. They're looking for a developer to come in and help them with their vision of what they wanted, they would want to and could do with McClellan. So a couple companies jumped in. This was just before I showed up. And what ended up happening is McClellan Park was the winner. That was the name of the new entity that showed up. So at this point, McClellan Park is born. Here's where the P3 thing starts, you guys. First of all, I gotta tell you, when I heard P3 for the first time, what is P3, right? Well, an economic redevelopment to me is, I guess we were doing this the whole time, or we just didn't know that it was called P3. I even told TJ that, and he said I need young guys like him to kind of explain it so I would understand the buzzwords. Because I even asked Josh, who works for me, who's a much younger guy than I am, and he had no clue what P3 was. So at any rate, what we're doing there is we're redeveloping this airport with Sacramento County. That in itself, public-private partnership in a pretty significant way, right? What we found out as time went by is that it became a little more complex than that. So the U.S. Coast Guard was a military installation that was left at McClellan. And shortly after that, CAL FIRE decided to move their operations to McClellan, all of their air operations. And we started to understand the significance of working alongside these military, federal, state, local agencies in efforts to help them with their mission is really what it was. So as we started to move into this thing, one of the things that happened was the downturn. 2008, the economic downturn hit us pretty good. All the private industry felt that pretty immediately, but I can tell you that the government sector doesn't feel it right away. They've got a few years of insulation before they start to feel it. So let's see, what slide am I on here? P3, before it was cool, that's where I'm a little behind here, sorry guys. So we started working through this thing and working along with our partners here, and we ended up at McClellan with a 99-year lease. That was the basis for this, with the ability for fee title. So fee title on everything except for the most significant component, which for me anyways, the airport. So there was 2 zones. The airport was divided into 2 zones. The taxiway and the parallel, the runway and the parallel taxiway was one zone. That was zone 1, oddly enough. Zone 2 was everything from that imaginary line to the fence line. Okay, so, and that was McClellan Business Park. The county owned and operated the other part of it. So we went along like this, and the idea was that we were going to get to a point that's called, we had determined in this complex development agreement that we had, which is the same thing I heard Brian talking about, this agreement you guys are working on. The complexities are pretty intense, but we would get to a certain point that we would call this thing viable. So the actual term was viability, and what that meant was that we had a certain amount of money coming in as a result of fees that were charged on every square footage of the property that we leased as McClellan Business Park. At that point, the county was convinced that we were going to be able to afford this airport, and then they were to get us the AIP funding. Time went by, everybody's happy, we're making things happen there, and then what happens is we get to a point where this viability issue comes into play, and so now it's time for AIP money, okay? So what ends up happening is this. The FAA is approached by McClellan and by Sacramento County with the concept of privatizing the airport. And that is because we started stumbling through this AIP fund issue, and we're quick to learn that this zone separation that I described earlier was an issue for the FAA. The FAA was not able to understand how the developer wasn't the entity that benefited from this. So thereby creating some serious issues in which we ended up hiring an attorney to work with the county's attorney to try to overcome those issues. So that took us a year or two to get through. In the meantime, things were continuing to grow, but we got to a point where we realized, well, that this is not something that's going to happen. So the topic came up between the County of Sacramento and McClellan Business Park. Hey, what if McClellan owned this airport? Well, that's got some interesting challenges, especially for the attorneys. The attorneys are like, oh my God, are you kidding me? We have this really complex development agreement. How are we gonna possibly do that, right? So anyway, we ended up working very closely with Sac County, their county council. They hired counsel, and we hired counsel. And by the way, through this whole process, just so you know, no AIP funding. The way this agreement worked was McClellan Business Park was paying all the bills for the airport, and still was at this point in time, including the attorney that the county hired. So this was something that was a real hot button for us to kind of, figure out exactly where we're going with this thing. So as we move towards the transfer of the title, some of the things that come up here are, you probably want to know, well, how does that happen? I mean, we actually own the airport. We own the land underneath it. We are in a Superfund site, so when the rest of these parcels, there's a few more on the airport, actually clear and become cleared environmentally by the Air Force, we have the ability to sell parcels of land and the dirt underneath them as well. It's a little bit different than most airports. So what happens in the majority of airport when an airport is in a BRAC closure, and I don't know, Brian, what your airport, how it was done, but most of them are done in what they call surplus property conveyance, right? That would preclude private ownership ever. That means that you are an airport in perpetuity because of the federal monies that have gone into that. Well, for whatever reason, and I haven't been able to find anybody to explain to me yet why this airport was not done that way, as an economic development reconveyance. So our relationship with the county was not so much with county airports as it was with economic development at the county to try to drive business there. And keeping in mind, my end of this business is the airport, those two zones I spoke to you about. There's a third zone outside of that, and that is the majority of the building space that I was talking about. So we're at a point now where we're talking with the county about how and is this a viable situation. So the big concern was, gee, what is the FAA gonna say, right? I mean, what is Caltrans Aeronautical gonna say about this? So I'm the only aviation guy in the partnership at McClellan. And the aviation idiot, the rest of these guys are developers. So they really didn't have a lot of faith in me when I told them after talking to to Caltrans and the FAA that, hey, this is not a problem. I mean, so we hired an attorney who he was ex-FAA, he was airport compliance, and he was assistant general counsel. He said the FAA really doesn't care. I mean, from an airport standpoint, try to tell a bunch of developers that. It doesn't work very well. So, at any rate, we ended up having several phone calls, and literally, guys, when it came down, the FAA wrote me a paragraph about, I don't know, like 5 lines. Yes, we're good with this. That was about it. Boom. The manager of the ADO down here in the Bay signed off on it, and that was it. That was enough to satisfy the attorneys and everybody. Caltrans, little different story. So they have the regulatory responsibility for that airport. And there were some discrepancies on the airport, and those had been kind of long running because we didn't know who was gonna end up owning this and how we were gonna deal with it, and exactly what McClellan was gonna turn into. So Caltrans comes in and says basically the same thing to me. They said, fill out the application and send me the transactional documents, and we're done. Again, I'm sitting here telling developers that are used to complexities that that's what's gonna happen, and they're looking at me going, no, it's not possible. Okay, so I told them 3 different times, 3 different ways, and the same response from them. So we ended up having a phone call that I absolutely dreaded with Caltrans, and that was like 8 of our guys, 4 county guys, and one, well, actually ended up being two Caltrans guys. And guess what they said? Fill out the application, send us the transactional documents, and we're done, guys. So hallelujah. So now finally I got relief, and boom, away we go. So that's sort of how you can get to a point where you're privatizing something as big as McClellan, 3,000 acres, 8.5 million square feet of building space. My partners have a tendency to call this a business park with an airport in the middle of it. They're wrong. This is an airport, guys, a big airport with a little business park in the middle of it. That's the way I look at it. They don't like that, but it works. It works for me anyway, which is all that really matters at this point. I think one of the biggest things, what are you laughing at, John? So anyway, I guess some of these guys know me. So let's get into, okay, what do you do next, right? Okay, so now you're gonna change this thing over. We need a plan. I'm a maintenance guy. I don't know a damn thing about transitioning an airport over into anything. So what happens is we start looking for a consultant. We find a consulting firm, and I'll mention their name here. That's cool, right? Nobody said, okay. So ACMG, you guys know them. They do a bunch of different things. This is really not what they do, but they have an individual that worked for them that is highly skilled and extremely organized kind of a guy. Let's see, am I in the right place? Transition plan. What's that? Okay, I'll wrap it up really quick. So what we got into next was you did warn me about this, didn't you? What we got into was the complexities of actually doing this thing. And I gotta tell you something, no pressure at all. All my partners said to me was no mistakes, absolutely no mistakes, right? You guys can't mess this up, don't drop the football. So I gotta tell you, I was stressed out for a good long while over this. Finally, started to calm myself down a little bit. I'm speeding through, sorry guys, my timing's off, but this is the plan that ACMG did for us. These are the missions and the goals, followed by the objectives. This thing is expandable, it's recordable, reportable. We used it between our 2 different teams, which is an executive team and a working team. And this was the worksheet page that we used to capture all of that data. These guys are really, really good at it. We're still using it. So this is how I calm myself. If you aren't confused, you aren't paying attention. This is what I convinced myself was a good thing to do. So I'm finally calm. I come into work one morning. This is the email I find from our consultant. What is he trying to tell me? And I understand he's watching right now, so thank you, Bob, for this. This is wonderful. Airport security, naked men on the tarmac? Really? This is what I got to think about next? Anyway, easy is the new difficult. FCC licenses were incredibly complex. I'll tell you one thing that we found out was that the AWAS was connected to, we had multiple locations. And the reason was the county was using it for different things. I mean, my God, you guys, the county jail? That was part of our UHF system that was there. We're still unwinding those kind of complexities, the wildlife plan, those sorts of things. So, at any rate, so now we get to this part. Dude, we own an airport. Standing out on my ramp one day, watching this, right, the very same day that this happened, and I'm seeing a car zooming down a taxiway with no lights, no markings, no anything, thinking, what did I get myself into here, guys? Guess who it was? The company that maintains the nav aids. They're the ones that should know better. They're the ones that are screaming down the taxiway. So anyway, so McClellan today, this is where we are, you guys. We have 230 tenants there. There's about 17,000 visitors a day. We're the largest privately owned public use airport. We have the largest aerial retardant base in the world located there. As evidenced by the Napa fires and Sonoma fires, which, by the way, I don't have that on my notes here, but it actually happened the very same day we were closing the runway to restripe it. The very same day. So to sum it up, without without Sacramento and the relationship with McClellan Business Park, we wouldn't be here today. So that's it.
Thank you, Scott. We've had a story about developing your land and using P3 as a way to enable further economic development. A story about survival, really, of how does the airport survive by public-private partnership. Once again, we'll pivot again to an FBO developer, and Scott Powell and his story, I think, is just as fascinating. So, Scott, you're up.
Well, after a hard night of bowling, am I going to be able to keep your attention for another 15 minutes? And we appreciate you giving us the time. It's great. You can go ahead and start that. So we are airside developers. And both of these stories really are a lot of landside development, and we are strictly in the fuel flight support and airside development. We operate at Sacramento Executive, Sacramento International, and Mather Airport. And what you're actually seeing here, here's how fast we actually work at Superior Aviation. This is live footage of, and the Sacramento County, this is how fast they issue the permits, and we expect to have this done by the end of my talk. No, it's really fun. This building that you're seeing here is 4 years in the making. Navigating through waters, as you heard Scott say, in California is oftentimes difficult. But we're going to have this project done, and we'll have our certificate of occupancy here in 2 weeks. And it'll be the first development at Mather Airport in 20 years. So we're excited about that. As we go through the different ways that you have a private-public partnership and have success, the key to the whole thing is really 2 points. One, pick the right partners. And if you pick the right partners, all your development partners, all your planning partners, that matters. Experience matters. Superior Aviation, as we did things with the Sacramento County airport system, we have 7 years of experience. We've invested $20 million in Sacramento. We're the largest FBO California-based chain, and we operate at 3 airports here. There's 3 really type of airside partners that you can choose from. And what we're trying to get, and I'll weave our story into this, but what I really would like is to leave you with some ideas that you can take back and say, hey, if we don't have one of these projects, how do we get there? If we do have one of these projects, how do we make it better? And there's really, from an airside, and you're all familiar with this, there's really 3 types of FBO airside operators you can choose from. You can choose with the large international chains, of really which there's 2. There's Signature and Atlantic. And there's some benefits to picking one of those. You're going to get instant credibility. You're going to get instant training. They're certainly going to have the capitalization to do what you want. And you're going to have a safe operation. It's not for all airports. There's some negatives to it. Oftentimes, those organizations are going to truly siphon money out of your local community, which is something you should consider. How big's your airport? But sometimes they're the only solution for you. There's a second group, which we're all familiar with them, is they're roll-up firms. And as you look through these 3, what we're really trying to decipher is who their customer base is. So with the international chain, their customer base is a worldwide network of people. And you move the needle for that international chain based upon how much you are providing their entire network. If you're a large airport like San Francisco, obviously you're going to move the needle. You're going to get a lot of attention from them. If you're a smaller airport, you're not going to get as much of attention. Certainly you're not going to get as much development on the air side. The roll-up chain, who's their customer? Their customer really is the large international chains. They're trying to work with you to extend leases, get new leases, buy existing FBOs, with the hope of putting a group together that then they can sell at some point to one of the international chains. And we've seen that before with Landmark, and Ross did it, and they're going to do it again. Modern Aviation, Lynx is doing it now. Eventually, you as the municipalities will be dealing with whoever they sell that FBO chain to. So just consider that as you're defining what you want to accomplish at your airports. And then lastly, you've got the local and the regional independent players. A good example would be Cutter Aviation. Certainly my company is a good example of that. And all of you can probably think of some other local businesses that are running in a region. Some of the benefits to that are that their customer base is really the people that are based in your region, and so they're focused on that. Now, some of the negatives is there's clearly some local regionals that aren't sophisticated enough or have the capitalization to complete the projects that you're going to define, so you may want to look elsewhere for that. So, Indiana Jones, you guys, Indiana Jones fans, you know, there's a scene in that original Raiders of the Lost Ark where they find where the Well of Souls are. And they're in there, and they're digging up there on that mountaintop, and the sun's setting behind them, and they finally hit stone. And Indiana Jones says, okay, clear away the dirt. Let's find the edges. And they define the edges of that a big piece of rock, and then they stick these pry bars in, and they pull it out. That's what I would really tell you to do. When you're thinking about your airport, define the edges. Make sure that you really understand the problem and you really look through a solution so that you can pick the right partner and know how we're going to achieve what we really want to achieve at our airport. Otherwise, you run into so much stuff that Scott ran into where it's just undefined, and you're going to struggle through it. Whereas I love what I heard from Brian. They had a clear vision of what they wanted to, so they were able to actually to go through and solve what they wanted to solve. So you've got to find the right partner. And another piece that I liked what I heard from Brian is the long-term leases. Do not be afraid to issue long-term leases, because as a developer, it's very difficult for me to go to a bank and I have to explain to them, okay, so we really don't own the land. Oh, okay. And yeah, we're going to build a hangar that we're probably going to lose money on. Oh, well, okay. What's that? And if we don't perform to the minimum standards of the airport, we lose the whole thing. Oh, the banks are kind of not excited about loaning us money. And so we need to have a long-term lease, and we have to have the support of the municipality to make sure that we can get the funding. It doesn't matter how big we are, whether it's the size of Brian's project or the size of the smallest FBO building a one hangar, we have to have the term of the lease to make it work. As you're finding your partners, you have to make sure that your partner's got the sophistication to actually bring in high-profile tenants that are willing to pay market prices. Because if there are sub-market rents at your airport, what'll happen is it precludes developers from building new facilities so that they can charge enough rent that they can pay for the building they just built. So all your county-owned buildings out there, make sure you're regularly raising the rents so that you can always afford to have new construction and the rents will match on the new facilities. And it's also good for your pocketbooks too. Local FBO, you got to make sure they support the community, that they're engaged. And another piece is the single source. I would highly advise you to contemplate always looking into a single source FBO from the fuel and flight support. That will allow the profitability to bring in more money for the airport system and allow for more construction on your airport. Now, there's going to be a lot of people that say, hey, well, competition's good. And I would agree that there is some things that are good. There's constructive competition, and then there's destructive competition. Constructive competition would be, say, on I-5, when you're driving down I-5 and there's a whole bunch of gas stations and fast food joints at one exit. Well, what that's going to do is that's going to bring more people to that exit because they realize, oh, I can go to Taco Bell, I can go to Chick-fil-A, I can go to McDonald's, I can buy gas at this gas station, I can buy gas at this gas station. So it becomes a true stop on the freeway, and the competition grows the amount of users on the airport. Then there's destructive competition, where when you bring destructive competition in, all you do is divide up the total aggregate dollars among multiple players, and you don't get anything for it. And an example I'd use for destructive competition would be those of you who have, how many people have commercial service at their airports here? Okay, so quite a few. If I came to you and said, hey, you know what? You need to have competition in your parking lot. It'll bring prices down. Well, the first thing you'd say is, well, that's crazy. That's a revenue source for us. Not one person, not one more new person's coming to our airport because we have competition in our parking. So think that through. All it really does is drive down the amount of money that can be derived there. It also allows you to negotiate good volume fees. You always have to have minimal annual guarantees on the air side so that you know at a minimum of how much money you're going to be getting in. And it allows you to know the amount of confidence that the airside operation you're working with has in their organization. Also, with the sole source, and this is just a derivative of that, I would highly advise having a local community to set prices for your local users. Therefore, you don't get that call at 5 o'clock in the afternoon by some guy driving a Bonanza that is furious that he just paid $8 for Hyundai Low-Let. None of us want to get those calls. So make sure that your local fees are contained, especially on the piston side. While it's not a true revenue source, it's 98% of the hassle, 2% of the revenue. Is this recorded? And then lastly, maximize obviously your FAA participation, and you can't do it alone. Your FBO partner needs to aid you in getting maximum FAA funds, and that can be done through the private side as well as through the public side. So choosing the right airport. I'm going to brag a little bit about Sacramento. I've had obviously my hassles with Sacramento. They've certainly had their hassles with me, but what we did is together, Sacramento and Superior Aviation put together a product that works. And specifically at Mather, we're putting $12 million in. We're just finishing up our project. We have had tremendous results since we took over Mather from Atlantic Aviation in 2015. And it really comes down to the metrics that you see here. From job growth to revenue growth to local tenants base there to investment, everybody that's been associated with has been very happy with the results. Long-term leases, just to go back to that, it is vital on this long-term lease. If you take anything away from my conversation, make sure you issue the long-term lease. I'm sure Brian had to swallow hard on some of the terms that they were throwing out there. Scott got a 99-year. That allows these projects to work. It sounds like a long time, but when I'm on the other side of the lease, that seems to go by pretty quickly. And remember, if you give a 20-year lease to someone and expect a $20 million investment, that's $1 million a year of after-tax amortization. That's real loss on the project. You have to give the developer enough time to recoup his money and make some money. Otherwise, you're not going to get anyone interested in your project. That's the end of my conversation. It doesn't look like our building got too far since we started, but I appreciate your time. I'm looking forward to having your questions.
Thank you, Scott. Three very different stories, three very different perspectives on public-private partnerships, and I'm sure there are dozens more of how public P3 can enable and support airport development, operation, and economic viability. So great job by all three of you. Now Q&A. I would ask that you wait for the microphone if you have a question, comment, or interaction you'd like to have with the panel members. So who would like to go first? Not everybody at once. Okay, furthest away. So you, then TJ has a question. TJ, do you have a question too? You're just trying to get my attention, and then Joe has one.
Hi, Rosemary, San Jose Airport. So I want to ask about the Phoenix Mesa project. At San Jose, we have customs facility. It's been growing, expanding, more international service, but it's led to some real concerns about staffing for customs. So you're talking about both U.S. customs and Mexican officials, customs offering service. Has that been addressed? And I know it's a long time down the road as you continue to build this project and expand, but have you addressed the staffing situation?
We have, and the project owners, the Mesa Skybridge LLC, they are paying for, we're a user fee customs airport, and so they are paying for any additional U.S. customs employees that are needed in their project to pre-clear and work in joint inspection with the Mexican customs officials. The country of Mexico is paying the Mexican officials, the customs officials, to be in Mesa.
Do you have a follow-up?
I mean, we at San Jose, we have 559 program for customs. I mean, we're doing everything we can just to get our U.S. officials staffed up. It's just a real struggle, especially in the Bay Area, and we have 2 other Bay Area airports. So it's one thing to pay them, but it's another thing for the customs officials to actually have the staff available for serving the needs.
Yeah, and we've been talking with U.S. Customs. They've been at the table the entire time and actually have been working hand in hand with Mexican Customs. Right now, it's not a problem because we only have one, and when we have one Mexican Customs official who is scheduled to do the pre-clearance, and they usually have a second that will come up from Mexico or will come over from Laredo to assist. But I imagine if this thing catches on and we start to get really busy, you know, it's much like we've talked about building an FIS facility at the airport. Building the facility to U.S. Customs and Border Protection standards is one thing. Finding customs officials to actually be deployed to your airport is another. So we haven't run into the problem yet because we've got a small group that has been working on this pilot project, and they all show up and pre-clear or joint inspect the cargo with Mexican customs officials. If this becomes a multi-trips a day and we need to have those people here, again, the Mexican consortium has agreed to pay for those services. We'd have to work closely with our customs officials to make sure that they've got staffing, adequate staffing to be able to delegate those resources over to Gateway.
Dr. Joe Husband.
Oh, greetings. Thank you, Doctor. Brian, the master lease versus the development leases, is there a differential in the cost of the land for the initial master lease, and or when you do the development leases, are those based on the market at the time? That's one question. And then the other was, did military reuse zone or foreign trade zone have any significant impact?
Both of them did, Joe. The MRZ and foreign trade zone both played a role. They are the Skybridge, Arizona folks, Mesa Skybridge LLC is working with a foreign trade consultant right now to ensure that they're able to certify and activate the foreign trade zone when they start to get tenants. The second part, or the first part of your question was? Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, so after year 3, the master developer will start paying rent, and they're paying a reduced lease rent on the undeveloped land that will help pay them back for the investment of the $40 million they're making into the infrastructure. As soon as they have a takedown package and go to a development lease, the whole deal structure changes. So the master lease rates and the development lease rates are totally different, and both have escalators and CPI adjustments. That's correct. Yep. Whatever the market is, because some of those developments, Joe, may happen in year 30.
Other questions? Or brief stories to share with your P3 experience? Arnie?
On your master development plan, does the whole 300 plus acres kick in with a 49-year lease up front, or is it done in incremental segments?
No, we actually tried to parse it out so that they would have access to a certain portion, and then once they exhibited success, that they would continue to get more. What they were afraid of is they have a vision for the entire park. And if they were only able to work on one piece at a time and somebody else was interested in coming in and doing something different, they would lose the synergies within the park. So they said, we'll take the whole thing down at once. It wasn't our first choice, but we were able to work through it. And you know, the fact that they're paying you for 360 acres while they're going through the development process, it worked out to be a pretty good deal for the authority. But we would have preferred to give them maybe 60 acres at a time, and once they showed success, we'd let them nibble in even more.
All right, I have a question for both the Scotts. So as developers have gone after a proposal from an airport and successfully won, we heard about term, but what are some other key things you look for that either makes you pursue or not pursue an RFP looking for a developer on an airport?
Which one?
Both Scotts.
From a development standpoint, I'm not sure how that question really applies to us because we own the entire airport. So one of the things that we do that is probably significantly different, and I didn't touch on this much because I ran over on my history aspect of this thing, but I can tell you a lot of our business comes from government, and it comes from those deep-rooted relationships with the different agencies that utilize the airport, such as the U.S. military by way of DHS, CAL FIRE being one, U.S. Forest Service, those things. From a development standpoint, the development is something that we're looking to do based on the prospects that we find. It's a little different. It's more like a traditional business park in that respect.
I would just add that if you take Mather as an example, so the northwest side of Mather, as we complete Truemper Road, that extension, and we complete the Cat 2 and then later the Cat 3 landing system, we'll have a Cat 3 landing system with dual runways of 8,000 feet plus apiece. That's going to be a very, very exciting cargo base. So what I would want to see the airport do is let's start to pave the way to where we know that development's going to come. And whether that's working with Department of Water Resources now on our flood and drain-off issues, we need to be preparing not only the land itself, but we also need to be preparing the local policy to allow the buildings that we know are going to be built. And then whether we're going to be, regardless of what we do with that land side, whether it's a long-term lease or whether we can actually sell it fee simple if we can get it out of the airport proper, I just think it's very important that our city's policy is lined up for the kind of construction that will come with that. And I think every single airport would have to look down those same roads.
Other questions? Maybe I could ask each of you to share just briefly in your personal journey in P3 and what you're involved with. What do you wish you could have done differently or wish you would have known before you started? Is there anything else you could share in that, in addition to what you mentioned in your presentation? Just a brief snippet of this is what I wish I knew, or this is a key lesson I learned that I think would be important for the audience here to understand. So,
Did you miss any tricks?
Oh, yeah. You know, I think this was really the first major international P3 that was undertaken by Gateway Airport, and I think there's an education process that needs to go along with the marketing that we did of our successes along the way, because we were talking about the securing of a master developer and the benefits of that, and you know, negotiating a master lease, and people on our board and people within our community expected to come out to the airport and see bulldozers and us turning dirt. And so we really had to manage expectations that these are the first several steps of a really long process, which involves the FAA, which involves, you know, a lot of other, the local community, if there's any types of variances that are needed to zoning, that we needed to really manage expectations that these 360 acres and the proposed 5 million square feet of development wasn't going to happen overnight. Because, you know, people would come out to the airport 2 weeks after the master lease was signed and they're like, well, I don't see anything. And you tell them, well, you know, they have to undertake a master plan that needs to be approved by the authority. That'll take a year. And then you've got to have the FAA environmental clearances, and they're working with them, but that could take a year. And so there's a process that you need to follow, and you need to set reasonable expectations, else people will automatically think your project isn't a success.
I'd say if I had something that we could have changed, and it really was not on our Mather development, but on earlier our Sacramento International development that we did in 2006. We did that right in the middle of what we in Sacramento were calling the big build, and there were some strained relationships between the airport system and the county development approvals, so just the county itself, so we call it the county and then the airport system. That led to some frayed relationships, and I ended up getting caught, my team ended up getting caught in the middle. So it was very difficult to get certain permits we wanted because the county was so mad at the airport system and the airport system was so mad at the county. And then that didn't just end when the big build ended. That actually was kind of a hangover that went all the way into the Mather project. And for those of you that are familiar with Sacramento, you know that that's true. So if I had to change that, I would have liked to have, if the airport and the county knew that a private developer was going to be coming in, I would have liked to have someone on the government side be a quarterback for me and be able to say, hey, look, we understand your project's not involved in these, and here's how you're not going to be held hostage. And that would have been great, but I was too naive to know that that was a problem until we were knee deep into it. And but that led to a lot of frustrations over quite a few years.
Scott Owens, your personal perspective?
Yeah, the thing that I wish would have been different was that we knew from the beginning that we, meaning Sacramento County as well as McClellan Business Park, that we would never receive AIP funding for that airport. It would have really helped us with our master planning. It would have helped us with the maintenance and the upkeep of the airport. It would have helped us to be a lot farther along than we are now, which is not bad, guys. I'm not complaining. It's been a wonderful ride, actually, and it wasn't because anybody didn't know. The development agreement was done in some kind of a condition where folks didn't recognize the fact that an imaginary line between a grant obligated land and private ownership wasn't going to work. So that's where we had to sort of adjust, and that happened in 2015. So that's what I'd like to see different.
Thank you. Well, we're honored that you took the time to prepare for and come and share your stories with us. I think it's very valuable, it's fascinating information, and I think it's very informative and educational for the group, so thank you for that. In lieu of giving a speaker gift, donations been made in your name to the Wounded Warrior Project, so I think that's a better opportunity, so we appreciate that. Please join me in thanking our speakers. Again, just to recognize the sponsors, Jacobson Daniels, Lee Fisher Jacobs, and Charles M. Schultz, Sonoma County Airport are our sponsors. So again, thank you all for your kind donations and sponsorship. And Gladys has announcements.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Thank you for getting up and attending the first session of the day. So wonderful to see everyone. So we're going to break with the exhibitors right now from 9:45 for the next 30 minutes. I do new business cards. If you did not or you ran out of business cards, there's some over there on that table, so you can search through them or just cross out your partners, put them in here. So we've got some great raffles this morning and this afternoon, as well as the bingo cards. Please visit with the exhibitors, get them to sign off on that. One of the housekeeping items, if you are going to do the tour tomorrow, they need your birth date. So please make sure that they have your birth date over at the registration desk, and that's for tomorrow's tour for the airport. So please, this is time to break. Please visit with the exhibitors, go around. They're excited to meet and speak with you. We also have exhibitors in the hall. So again, new business cards, I'll be right here up front, and enjoy your break. Thank you, everyone, and good morning.